Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar this morning, which is Making Hydrogen Production a Reality. It's around how can the sector overcome the key barriers to accelerate infrastructure delivery. So this morning I'm joined by three eminent guests, speakers. First will be Vicky Paley from Protium, followed by David Eccles, CBE, from Hydrogen Southwest, and then Greg Altira, Technical Director from SLR Consulting. So you're very welcome. Please start putting all your questions in the chat as we go along. Let's hope it's going to be a really lively debate this morning. Thank you so much again for joining us. Vicky, can I ask you to kick us off? Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to my fellow panelists. I'm really delighted to be here today to be talking about green hydrogen and how we can look at scaling up, and in particular, what we do at Protium. So as Fiona mentioned, my name is Vicky Paley, and I'm a key account director at Protium. I've been at the company for 5 years, and my job is to look after our projects and the technical and commercial viability and delivery of those projects from concept all the way through to FID. So I work across the portfolio, looking at how we can develop our projects and make sure that we are getting green molecules into the market at the right place, at the right price point. Go to the next slide, please. So Protium, for those of you who haven't heard of us, we are a green hydrogen project developer and gas company. We basically exist to accelerate the end of fossil fuel use in the UK by supporting the scale up and adoption of green hydrogen. We were established in 2019, so we're 7 years old next year. And we look to develop, design, own, and operate our own hydrogen production facilities across the UK and sell those molecules to our customers to help displace fossil fuels. So we are one of the few green hydrogen production companies that actually are selling green hydrogen into the market today. And that's a massive part of what we see is beneficial as a business, and what we see is beneficial to the scaling up of green hydrogen is to actually connect customers with the molecules and making sure that they're ready to receive the hydrogen at their end. So not only do we develop projects, but we also develop meaningful relationships with our customers. We help our customers make sure that they have the infrastructure in place in order to be ready to receive hydrogen, and to make sure that it's delivered to them in a way that's easy. And that's our tagline, is green hydrogen made simple. And we really truly believe that by doing this, we can accelerate the adoption of green hydrogen across some core markets, and where electrification can't reach. So we're not hydrogen evangelists. We don't believe that hydrogen is the answer to full decarbonisation. But where electrification doesn't reach, we believe that green hydrogen has a really, really big role to play. And we want to accelerate that adoption by making it easy for customers to get those molecules and then to be able to use them. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? So our approach is really to seed the market and then scale. So we look to put our projects and to put our molecules where we feel like these three pillars basically all converge, as shown in this Venn diagram. Love a Venn diagram. So what we look to do is generate and capture demand, and we do this through deploying our pioneer assets. So our pioneer assets are our smaller, quick to market assets that we can deploy quickly and get green molecules into a region where we see that we can seed the demand and grow customer base. And then we capture that demand in a certain geography. That helps us give a first mover advantage. And a lot of solves a lot of the problem around, you hear a lot around chicken and egg. So this chicken and egg problem of hydrogen is that some people want it, but they don't know where to get it from. So we really look to put assets down where we see that we can solve a problem like that for the customers. The next part of the pillar is obviously technical and commercial viability. So making sure that we're putting our projects where and we have potentially access to cheaper electrons or cheaper feedstocks in areas where there's already, industrial use. So it's easier from a planning and permitting standpoint and also from a constructability point of view, and where we think that there's customer willingness to pay. So potentially where their incumbent fuel is already very expensive, or where hydrogen actually offers a better product than what they're currently using. And where we see that a lot at the moment is in the off-grid market, off-grid power market, where customers have traditionally used diesel and diesel generators and are looking for a better solution, a quieter solution, a cleaner solution, and hydrogen offers that solution for them. And then the third pillar is enabling macroeconomics. So where there is good policy, good regional support for hydrogen, and where we can kind of leverage that support for the project. So we really work across these pillars to make sure that we're putting hydrogen in the right place at the right time, at the right price point. And as I said on my previous slide, we really work with our customers to ensure that they're ready to receive the gas and remove those friction points and help them increase their reasons to switch. And from there, using our pioneer assets and seeding that market, building that customer base and building that demand, we then look to scale with our larger assets. So we've got two projects that we have won in the hydrogen allocation round, number 2, and one of those is Magor Net Zero in South Wales, and the other one is South Tees. So they will build on our pioneer assets, and they will be our larger scale assets, which will then use the relationships and the customer base that we've built to then have the demand there ready for these large assets. Next slide, please. And an example of this is a real life example. We're really, really proud to be delivering this project and to bring it online next year. This is our Pioneer 2 facility, which is a 2.5 megawatt NEL PEM electrolyser. And that's going to be coming online in Neath Port Talbot in South Wales in Q1 next year. So 2.5 megawatts, again, people might be thinking, well, that's peanuts, it doesn't mean anything, but it's actually extremely important. It's really important that we're getting these molecules into the customer base, as I said, and this project is quite a big step up from our current operating facility, which is 100 kilowatts, and will allow us to access a whole range of new customers. It will allow us to test contracts, how we contract with customers, what those contracts look like, what kind of provisions we need to have in those contracts to make sure that we are delivering the best service for our customer and also trying to achieve the lowest price. And it also helps us as well in terms of looking at scale on the upstream side. So how we negotiate our PPA for our electricity, what that looks like, how we can be flexible around that with our PPA provider, and what kind of commercial constraints we can put in place to ensure that everybody's winning in this and that we're really, really trying to drive down the cost of the molecule. And it also means a lot in terms of what we're learning in terms of construction, how you lay these facilities out, what it means to operate them, and the learnings that we're gaining. So these are small facilities, but they are really important, connecting the customer to the molecule and unlocking that demand, as well as the upstream learnings. And just to finish, before I pass on to my colleagues, Pioneer 2 is due to come online at the end of Q1 next year, and we will have gas available on the market. We are doing site visits if anybody's interested in at the end of January, February, and March. So please contact me afterwards, and we can definitely arrange a site visit. Everybody's more than welcome to come and see the facility and before it goes into operation, and to register your interest if you are interested in decarbonising and displacing your fossil fuels for hydrogen. Thanks,
Vicky,
Fiona.
thank you so much. That was fantastic, and what a great opportunity to go and actually see your facility. Thank you so much. Right, so now we're going to move on to David Eccles. David, are you there? Great.
I am. I am. Hello, Fiona.
Hello.
Morning, everybody. David Eccles. I'm Director of Hydrogen Southwest. Could we have the first slide, please? There we are. So, Southwest of England is a very different model to other parts of the country. We don't have large industrial demand that needs to be where fossil fuels need to be replaced. We've got a much more distributed demand profile, and therefore we see a much more distributed production network. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment or two. First of all, who are we? Well, you can see there are major board members on the left-hand side, supporting partners, particularly the local authorities who the organisations there, the Grouch Southwest and Western Gateway, that we hope will be replaced in its place on the board with the West of England Combined Authority. They provide access to the public sector. Business West provide our backroom support. GW4 are the big four universities. And in the Southwest, we are very blessed with strong R&D, innovative and academic strength that we can deploy in support of the emerging hydrogen ecosystem. So next one, please. Here are some of our other members. You can see companies large and small who are part of our group. It's essentially, we are a trade body looking to both influence policymakers and also help join the dots to bump start projects, because only by getting projects actually on the ground that things actually happen and we move forward. Next slide, please. So, what do we aim to do? I've described the vision there already. We are across the make it, move it, use it spectrum and across all of the domains. So we have working groups in aviation, maritime, land transport and infrastructure, each of those working groups have about 40 or 50 members, and we virtual meetings get together, led by Airbus for aviation, Costain for land transport, Bristol Port for maritime, and Wales and West Utilities for infrastructure. And it's an opportunity for people to meet, exchange ideas, and particularly gain in market intelligence about what's happening and how they might get involved in projects into the future. So that's what we're trying to do. I've just shown a little graphic because everyone loves a map, and a picture paints 1,000 words. Picking up on Vicky's point earlier, the Protium are involved in the High Hall project, which is a project to provide HGVs with hydrogen fuel in a pilot scheme across the line of the M4 from South Wales across to Reading. I understand that one of the key sites is likely to be in Avonmouth, which is beginning to turn into a bit of a clean fuel hubs mecca type place. There's lots of interest in there. We have the Celtic Seas floating offshore wind platforms. They're coming online towards the end of this decade, and there will be, one hopes, curtailed power that can be used for hydrogen production. We've also got a number of nuclear licensed sites in the region. They perhaps host SMRs following on from Wilver, who knows, and be used to create green electrons, which in turn can be used for electrolysis for hydrogen production. So some production in the region and some uses across the region. In essence, we see a sort of measle map of small-scale projects coming online, perhaps using more innovative technologies, high temperature use with waste to produce hydrogen and black carbon residue, other techniques involving plasma and so on. So novel technologies that don't necessarily depend on large government grants to make them happen, but a measle map of small projects serving local demand, local niche industrial demand, or whatever. in addition to that, we see a number of larger sites around the region, probably along the coastline. The first couple are already in play. That's the Langage Power Station in Plymouth. That was under HAR1. We've got the St Austell project, 40 Energy's project at St Austell, looking to produce hydrogen for kaolin production and associated techniques, and that's in HAR2. But the really interesting thing, and where I think this is going to go in the southwest, is green fuels, synthetic hydrocarbons, and particularly maritime. Now, as we know, just going back a step, aviation, second largest aerospace cluster outside the US, based around north of Bristol, South Gloucestershire, and in due course, sustainable aviation fuel will be produced that will bridge the gap until hydrogen aircraft are flying, towards the middle of the century fully on hydrogen. So SAF is seen as a bridge, and so there's going to be some synthetic SAF required. But the more immediate requirement we can see is for maritime fuels. Green methanol seems to be the way the industry is going. How do you produce it? Well, hydrogen produced from green sources, electrolysis, and then combined with CO2 captured perhaps from energy from waste plants or other processes. Combine the two, you've got methanol, which can be used. And there's some very interesting examples we're looking at, benchmarking what's happened up in Northern Ireland, in Larne and Belfast, and up in Scotland, the Kintore project. Lots going on there, and big companies are looking to see if they can reproduce that sort of commercial model down in our part of the world. So that's it in a nutshell. We see ourselves as piloting technologies, systems, commercial operations, and constructs for the rest of the country and further afield. We've got a large distributed base, a lot of interest in the subject, and a huge amount of R&D, innovative and academic support. And that combines to make a very exciting region in which we can pilot these new technologies and see if we can then scale them up to much larger projects. I think at that I will pause and pass back to you, Fiona.
Thank you very much, David. That's really great. Thank you. Very coordinated, lots of activities. Great to see it. And these smaller projects, as they cluster, can actually then start to really scale up. So great opportunities going forward. Brilliant. Right. So next we will hand over to Greg to take the floor, if you may. Fantastic. Thanks, Greg.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Fiona. I'm Greg Altria, Technical Director at SLR Consulting. Just share my screen. SLR is a global environmental and sustainability advisory consultancy with over 4,000 staff across the globe. I'm pleased to be able to share some of my thoughts around how we can make hydrogen production a reality in the UK today. So first thing I wanted to talk about was patience. Tolstoy said the two most powerful warriors are patience and time. And when in tough times to keep going, like, great achievements aren't realized overnight. For me, the kind of hydrogen production roadmap was always overly ambitious, if I'm totally honest, and I think that's been playing out now, and we have to bear in mind that since that time we're kind of globally and domestically dealing with kind of populist rhetoric that is affecting policy and kind of investor appetite in the UK. To kind of bridge that gap, it'd be great to see the UK Labour government make some progress in the polls against issues like the cost of living, growing the economy, so that it can have more confidence to deliver that policy consistency and its manifesto aims ahead of the next general election. One of the kind of key challenges that's faced the particular electrolytic hydrogen sector is the electricity network. Getting a connection has been really difficult. I work on projects that started out thinking they get a grid connection in 2028, they get a grid offer that turns into 2032, and now with the kind of grid connection reforms, they're sat next year waiting for a revised offer that may push that out further into the future. Plans are in place with NESO now and grid connection reform and electricity market reforms to try and address some of this. But obviously, to provide confidence in that investment case, evidence of that bearing fruits needs to be seen. UK track record with nationally significant infrastructure projects needs to be built upon. We've got recent planning reforms and introduction of a single regulator for nationally significant projects, and everyone will be watching Lower Thames Crossing as the first project to go through that process with great interest. If that could be delivered without major cost overruns or major timeline issues, then that's going to provide confidence for these big projects and show that we can improve our grid. And lastly, I think the sector needs some wins to prove that commercial operation, bolster confidence and re-establish momentum. There are companies out there that are doing this, and the likes of Protean, which we heard from Vicky earlier, EET with Stanlow hydrogen production project, and GeoPura, which are in construction. When they're commercially operating, we can get behind them and build that momentum. For wider spread adoption and to expand the use cases, the economics need to stack up. Renewables UK and Hydrogen UK released a report earlier this year, which was focused on reducing the cost of electrolytic hydrogen, and it identified measures that could be taken to reduce the cost from that £241 a megawatt hour strike price in HAR1 to under 100 megawatt. The kind of key ones that are discussed are electricity costs, up to 70% of the cost of electrolytic hydrogen is from electricity costs, and 50% of that is system costs. The expansion of the energy intensive industry scheme and climate change levy have helped to address those in the short term, but going forward, we need a more proactive approach to address the source of the problem, going back to the need to invest in the grid and its expansion for the renewable age. Also, the report mentions that electrolytic hydrogen projects are exposed to price fluctuations in electricity, with indexation under the HAR process linked to inflation rather than the price of electricity. So in terms of lesson learned, like how strike prices are indexed could be reviewed. And they're also exposed to the grid carbon intensity, the point at which low carbon hydrogen standard thresholds for carbon intensity are met. If that slips from the 2030, 2032 into the future, it might limit the number of hours that they can operate and affects that profitability. The report also mentioned updates to low carbon hydrogen standard that could be made to reduce costs. So the need for half-hourly temporal correlation could be reviewed, the requirement for electricity generator suppliers to retire their egos, for example. Some of my observations from previous allocation rounds, I've already mentioned the timetable associated with the hydrogen production roadmap. It took 15 months in the HAR1 round for contracts to be awarded. Obviously, for future rounds, you'd like to think the process could be streamlined, but I think the timetable should be reviewed and retained as ambitious, but realistic and stuck to. In hindsight, timing of policy measures to stimulate infrastructure delivery and demand could have been done better, but we need to bear in mind that progress needs to be made over perfection, and it is what it is. I'd ask whether there's a role for risk-taking intermediaries or grid blending that could be provided into future rounds. In relation to HAR2 specifically, I noticed that greater weighting was given to price, understandably, and less to deliverability. Some analysis of those HAR2 projects has identified that the majority of them are yet to apply for planning permission or obtain planning permission, which in my mind is a risk to them being delivered or delays. Also, there's questions in my mind as to how well the costs are for some of the projects are understood. I've seen projects that have gone through a lot of engineering and the costs are well understood, that have lost out on price. And I do wonder whether for some projects that have been awarded, how well do they understand the costs, and when those costs are revealed to them in latter engineering phases, are they struggling to make the costs stack up? Create a favourable market condition for off-takers. Length of off-take agreements, something that the industry has said, who would, there's limitations to who would go for a 15-year off-take agreement. What could be done about that? Could off-take agreements be made shorter with government guarantees for the longer term? I've already talked about access to supply infrastructure, cost of hydrogen, risk-taking intermediaries, grid blending, and political certainty, all of which will provide confidence to investors within the sector and help make those investment decisions and aid bankability. And I look forward to forthcoming policy measures that will unlock use cases. I think hydrogen to power is going to be essential to the sector. Could provide a positive feedback loop to decarbonisation of the electricity grid when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining. UK ETS and carbon border adjustment mechanism provides a clear route for decarbonisation, but the pricing remains uncertain. So reviewing the free allocation and compensation under ETS would be important. For the logistics sector, the previous U-turns on the zero emissions vehicle mandate was unfortunate and has kind of undermined the use case for investment confidence in that sector, particularly at a time when there's no clear winner in terms of technology. So more work's needed in that space. And sustainable aviation fuels, there's the revenue certainty mechanism being consulted on at the moment. The questions in my mind, it doesn't allow blue hydrogen or kind of HAR hydrogen to be utilised as a feedstock, which is that best to kind of, does it preclude hydrogen in a role or limit its role in as a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuels? So thanks for taking the time to listen to my thoughts. Key takeaways of patience, political certainty, and reducing costs of electricity being the main ones, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. And please get your questions in. I can see there's not many in the chat at this moment in time, so please do that. In the meantime, I'm going to ask a few questions to the panel. So, Vicky, I'm really impressed with Protium. Known the company for a number of years, and it's fantastic to see what your organisation is doing.
Thank you.
The challenge now of actually scaling up, okay. What do you see is your path to achieving that going forward? I mean, it's great you got your 2.5 megawatt, but how are you gonna keep going?
I think it's about bringing those kind of three pillars together that we discussed, and making sure that we create the right kind of environment foundation to bring all of the elements together to make a project successful. I think something that's really challenging is that you're trying to develop new projects in a new market in an environment where the floor is constantly moving underneath you. And so what we try and do is create stability there by building that customer base and then growing with that customer so that when they're ready to accept more scale and in larger volumes, then we look to put that down. We also look for, customers where they have, a higher tolerance to price. We talked about hydrogen price a little bit there in Greg's presentation, and I'm sure we'll come on to it again. But there are certain industries and certain locations where their incumbent fuel source is expensive. If you think about like the islands in northern Scotland where they're importing fuel oil, they have a very, very high cost of energy there. So actually putting a project down in that location and offering them a hydrogen solution, albeit usually they would still have to be subsidized. It provides them with almost in some cases, a cost benefit. And helps them then transition into that fuel. And then we also see, the opportunity for scale, as Greg mentioned, with and David as well, with hydrogen derivatives. So e-fuels, maritime fuels, and using green hydrogen as a feedstock for those fuels as well to really unlock the scale. And so it's about bringing together the customers and the geographies with the underpinning policy to create that stable foundation that you can build these large scale projects on. And then that also attracts investment, it attracts debt because of that stability, because that's what investors and banks are looking for. So that's really how we approach the scale side of things, is to try and get that kind of environment right. Okay,
fantastic. And is there any sector you could see really being the front runner as you're going out engaging with potential off takers? For me, I used to work very much around the transport side, okay, because we can obviously know that hydrogen could be a really lucrative as a fuel. Can you see whether it's industrial processes, or is it just a mix?
Yeah, so we focus on three core markets. So the first is industrial heat, where we see that there can be a price premium. So for customers that use heat for a premium product such as whiskey, where they have a premium price tag on that end use product, or where they potentially have a really high energy price today. So we're not looking at kind of low grade heat anymore, which was what the focus of HAR1 is. And I think, as the policy has kind of moved away from that. So we look at industrial heat, but quite niche applications. We then look at off-grid power and diesel displacement. So that's, construction sites, festivals, anywhere where they're using kind of an off-grid power supply. And actually, one of our customers, Panasonic, their microwave factory in Cardiff, they've gone completely off-grid and we supply the hydrogen to their fuel cell. And that's a really innovative approach that they're using solar panels, a battery, and a fuel cell to have a kind of microgrid that powers their factory 24/7, so they don't need to rely on the grid anymore. So that's an off-grid power solution. And then diesel displacement as well. So heavy goods vehicles, long haul transport, and also in construction where battery, a battery electric vehicle or a tipper can't drive onto a construction site where the road is uneven. So, that's our key focus. And then our final core market is SAF and e-fuels, and those and ammonia and those hydrogen derivatives. So they're the key pillars and markets that we look to deploy in.
Great. Thank you, Vicky. I see we have a question at last. That's great. I will be coming back to you, David and Greg. But let's got 2 questions now. Okay. The first one, the 7th carbon budget significantly revised the role of hydrogen for the UK, e.g. limited applications, minimal role in transport, focus on industrial clusters, heat pumps to be prioritised for heat decarbonisation. Do the panel agree or disagree with the 7th carbon budget? I will start with David.
It's slightly disappointing. It comes back to Greg's point about the inconsistency of policy and so on, and the focus is very much on niche industrial applications, and we all get that, and we all understand the reasons for it. But I would have hoped that we could have had a broader base to the use and the support for that use. And I particularly come back to Greg's point about a risk-taking third party as an off-taker who could take the hydrogen that's produced by the developer and then sell it on, with perhaps the gas grid being the user of last resort. So I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity, and certainly the inconsistency and the wobbling that it exemplified didn't help.
I think as well, just to add to, sorry, Fionn, just to add to
No,
David's
go for it.
I think we should electrify where we can. And
Of course.
I think, we should always lead with that. But I think what's the most disappointing thing about this revision is that over 50%, I think, of UK's industry is outside of industrial clusters. So what about them? And I don't think it's fair to just completely disregard that such a significant proportion of the UK's industry. And so I think that's a really key thing that needs to be brought back in is to think about, okay, well, yeah, we have these industrial clusters, and it makes sense to put, large scale production there, but 50% of the UK's industry is distributed. And David must see that in his region, because if you don't have large industrial clusters. So what about those businesses, those regions, how are they then going to decarbonize using hydrogen?
Thank you. Great. Greg.
Yeah, could echo David and Vicky's thoughts, really. I mean, there's differing opinions depending on where you look on this kind of thing. And likewise with Vicky, I'm not saying hydrogen is a solution for everything. I think you need the right decarbonisation solution for each use case and each project. So bringing down the cost is paramount to that, and investment in the UK's electricity grid also.
Thank you. Okay, please get your more questions in. That'd be great. Is there something, well, I've still got hold of you, Greg. Is there something we should be engaging the UK government through all these? I mean, they haven't got a crystal ball, and we know that. But, we've been at this game for a very long time. And when we think about how we compete globally, when our electricity price, as we've already spoken about, is so high, how are we actually going to really drive this UK hydrogen economy forward? Is there things we could be speaking, engaging with the UK government to say, look, we've learned all those lessons. This is what we really need to be concentrating on. Coming together as the whole of the hydrogen economy in the UK. All these organisations. What can we be doing to really support and make sure we do things right? Big question.
Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah. It is. I mean, that's it. There's the trade bodies out there. Hydrogen UK, Hydrogen Energy Association are doing great work, and actually, do see the government
Hydrogen Scotland.
Hydrogen Scotland being very governments are very respective to their recommendations that they make. You see a lot of the recommendations they make, turning up in policy. So continue with that good work. I think bringing together different government departments to ensure consistency across the different departments needs to be focused on. So ensuring the Department of Business and Trade and Transport is talking with DESNZ and having their policies aligned and singing from the same hymn sheet is something to focus on.
I think fundamentally as well, Greg was talking about lowering prices and electricity prices and upgrading the grid. I mean, upgrading the grid is only going to increase our electricity prices, and there's so much infrastructure that we need to do. And I know this panel is about scale, but realistically, in the UK, with our electricity prices and electricity being 80% of the cost of LCOH of hydrogen, we're never going to compete. So are we actually trying to answer the right exam question? What does scale actually mean? What do we actually need to do as a nation to, be resilient, to build domestic supply, but then also prepare ourselves for the inevitable fact that we are going to be importing hydrogen at some point, 2030, 2035, from places that it is significantly cheaper to produce it. And then how can we be ready with the technology and all of the infrastructure that we need to be able to receive that hydrogen, and then have the downstream market and the customers ready to be able to buy it as well. So I feel like in the UK, the question shouldn't be how do we make it bigger, how do we make it better? And maybe that's a kind of fallback from our oil and gas days. I think a lot of us are kind of come from an oil and gas background, and bigger is better and scale. But there's a fundamental flaw. You're never going to achieve, under £5 a kilo in the UK at the electricity prices that we have and that are forecast in the long term. So are we thinking about this question properly? And should we kind of be reframing it away from mega scale and mega projects to how do we protect our sovereign interest and promote the lowest cost molecule coming in for our market?
Yeah.
Thanks, Vicky.
Could I
come
in, Fiona?
Of course you can. I was going to invite you in.
Yeah. So thank you. Absolutely. I'm building on what Vicky was saying about, slightly reframing the question. It's interesting that in our part of the world, in the Southwest, as I described, the distributed nature of it and the lack of grid infrastructure, what people are turning to both at the micro and looking at the macro scale is essentially private wire. So you're not beholden to the fluctuations in energy price, relying on curtailment or anything else. But you have a costed model in which you are in control. So whether that be, a very small solar or wind turbines generating for Cornish lithium, for example, electrolysis there for hydrogen for Cornish lithium, or whether you're looking at doing it at a much bigger scale with a private wire from an SMR for a synthetic hydrocarbon facility of some sort. That's the way the thinking seems to be going at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, David. We have another question from a chap called Paul Rogers. Thank you, Paul. Should we be looking at using existing energy generation infrastructure, such as energy from waste, more effectively for hydrogen production to better support hydrogen production, as energy is a relatively cheap byproduct, and especially if carbon capture can be utilised? Good question, Paul. Thanks very much. Okay, I've got you, David, right here. So let's ask you first.
Yeah. Yes is the short answer. Energy from waste plants, carbon capture. There are all sorts of ways in which that can be done. I mean, just for example, down at Devonport at the Royal Navy naval base down there, they've got a plant that with excess capacity, and one of the options they're looking at is for the excess to be used, not to plug it into the grid, but to produce hydrogen. So yes, and carbon capture, if we can capture the carbon and then use it in the production of synthetic fuels without trying to create a new market for CO2, I think that would, there's another upside to it as well.
And it's all
Brilliant.
about
Thank you.
circularity. Like, the more circular we can be, the more we can look to, solve problems that other people are having. So that's a great example that David just used about there's a lot of waste to energy companies that are waiting for grid connections. So instead of, them having to wait for grid connections, there's a lot of hydrogen projects that are waiting for grid connections for the opposite electrons flowing in the opposite direction. So, how can we use those problems and solve one single problem together, to create ecosystems and, gas facilities where you're producing hydrogen, oxygen, CO2, and then integrate that, into the wider economy, and, make almost like kind of little refineries almost, out of these facilities. So I think, almost taking a step back and having a look what everybody's doing across the ecosystem of decarbonisation, rather than just thinking about your one solution and how that solves a problem, and seeing how you can integrate and weave all of the problems together into a single solution, I think is really important. And it's probably something that in our day to day, maybe Greg and David probably do it more because you have a more kind of holistic role. But in our day to day, sometimes you don't put your head up to look to the horizon and have a look at how you can kind of capitalize on these opportunities.
Thank you, Vicky. Greg.
Yeah, well, I wanted to come back to the point Vicky was making earlier about preparing the hydrogen market in the UK for the imports, and I'm mindful of that populist rhetoric that I was talking about energy security and protecting our industry, and electricity prices are a part of that, and British industry is struggling with the price of electricity at this moment, and it getting more expensive isn't going to help with that. I do wonder, with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, there is an opportunity for the UK to lead on that, continue to lead on that global stage with its decarbonisation efforts, and providing the right prices for industry.
Yeah. One thing I think about is also around this just transition for the UK. I live in Scotland, northeast Scotland, right? So Aberdeen's just down the road from me. With all that expertise that we have, in the oil and gas sector, for instance, maybe part of our whole hydrogen economy is the export of that expertise as we continue to, we know we're never going to be a major player, exporter. We get that. But, we do have an enormous skill set in the UK that from the oil and gas industry, whoever's worked there, we export globally. So how do we protect ourselves here and really look to sort of just transition, but in a fair, just way, but utilize all the expertise that we have? I've got you on the screen here, Greg, so I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, well, absolutely, making most of the resources available to us. Scotland is blessed with wind as a and it's offshore wind as a resource, and making good use of that. Funding's been recently announced for Project Union and pipelines which bring hydrogen down from Scotland, where it's got a very decarbonised grid compared to the rest of the UK, and can maximise the efficiency by bringing hydrogen into other parts of the country.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, I a slightly more granular point in a way. We're doing a lot of work with the National Composite Centre, who, on behalf of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, are looking at the skills required for hydrogen. And interesting that they've done a lot of analysis on various job types and roles and so on. Not complete yet, but well on the way. And what they're discovering is that we don't need a whole bunch of new skills for hydrogen. They talk about the hydrogen delta. So it's existing roles to which you need to bolt on a hydrogen element, whether that be in pipe fitting or whatever, in order to be able to participate in the hydrogen economy. So I think it's very much a question of building on what we've already got, rather than trying to throw all the bricks in the air and start again.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Vicky.
Yeah, I think building on that as well, it's about coming back to the kind of reason that we're all here, right? Because we believe in a net zero
Absolutely.
future, and we believe that decarbonisation is the biggest crisis facing humanity, and we want to decarbonise for our children and for our children's children, and we want to make sure that we can get on top of global warming and all of the wild weather events that are happening globally. And I think if you think about that holistically, it's a little bit easier to think about a just transition, rather than just trying to peddle one technology or peddle one solution. So I think, yeah, always kind of coming back to your why and your reason why is really important. And I think secondly, when you talk about decarbonisation currently, and the general rhetoric, as Greg was kind of alluding to earlier, is when I speak to customers about decarbonisation, they think expensive, they think I can push that out to 2035, it's all these kind of like negative connotations. Whereas if you talk to someone about decarbonisation in 2021, they were like, yes, love it. But if you talk to somebody about resilience, security of supply, and things like that are actually going to help their business and help their operations, even though you're providing the same solution, you're completely changing the conversation. And I think that's what we need to think about more is, yes, you're offering a decarbonised solution, which is great, but what people want is for their businesses to survive and to thrive. And for that, they need resilience. For that, they need security of supply. And so changing that conversation slightly definitely helps to open those doors slightly more and get the conversation going.
Yeah, I think in my work in the Carbon Trust, not this my gig here, I just want to comment on that.
Take the
Been
stage, Fiona, come on.
pioneering, we've been pioneering, decarbonisation for the last 20 odd years. It's quite challenging right now, I would say, globally.
Yeah.
And we have to go back. The incumbent fossil fuels, we can't say that's what we're going to hit all the time, right? Decarbonisation is going to cost, but we have to get the cost down as much as we possibly can. But it is around energy security, food security. We haven't really touched about ammonia. I mean, globally, it's that type of changing our mindset, I would say, is probably something that we really need to think about. And we support everyone on this just transition. It's not easy, right? And people just think about their food bills or whatever. Yes, they want to see decarbonisation, but priorities are what they've got in front of them. Right, we've got another question. Thank you, anonymous attendee. In the UK, is the UK on track to achieving the 10 gigawatt by 2030 target, considering that HAR2 will deliver less than 1 gigawatt? Vicky, I have you on screen, so I'll kick off with you. Thanks.
I mean, it's a really short answer, no. We're definitely not on track to achieve that. But I think, as Greg mentioned at the start of his presentation, the ambitions were pretty lofty. And I think that's one kind of narrative that we're hearing a lot in the hydrogen industry at the moment, is that the green hydrogen hasn't really lived up to the promise. And I think that is a narrative that a lot of people are holding on to. But I think it's really important to say that we have made a really significant amount of progress, even though we haven't hit those lofty targets. And the Hydrogen Council released their Global Hydrogen Compass a few weeks ago. And I've just got the stats here, so apologies, I am reading. But since 2020, £110 billion worth of projects have taken FID globally. And to put that into context, in 2019, McKinsey and the Hydrogen Council estimated that 100 billion would need to be spent by 2030 for us to bring the hydrogen supply chain costs down. So we've done that 5 years earlier. So it's a really significant milestone globally. So although, if you think about Gartner hype curve, hydrogen's done a real classic on that. And we were really hyped up in 2020, 2021, and we've come right down the curve. And so, yeah, we haven't delivered to the ambition that we wanted to for a plethora of reasons, but there's still a lot to be excited about. There's been a lot of consolidation in the market, which we see as positive because you are really weeding out what's real and what's not. You're getting investment where it's really important to get investment, and Protium's really proud. We raised £31 million last year, which is 10% of all clean tech Series B funding, which is incredible. So I think it's really important then to see like what is real and what is not. And then I think that you are really driving delivery at that point then rather than hype. So yeah, I mean, you can look at the stats. You could look at the stats of pretty much any ambitious, plan for energy in history, and you probably wouldn't have hit the targets. So having targets is really important, but it's also really important when you don't hit them to look at the reality of why and still take the wins and the progress that we have made that we definitely wouldn't have made if we didn't have those ambitious targets to start with.
That's great. Thank you, Vicky. David.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd only be repeating what Vicky said, but
Please do.
so I've got nothing further to add to Vicky, who enunciated it brilliantly.
Thank you, David. Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar efforts, and I think now many of the energy utilities are focusing on grid reinforcement, and oil and gas majors are focusing on their core kind of business areas, the likes of Protium, and can only benefit from the opportunity.
Fantastic. Okay. One of my final questions, I think, so we've got no more in the chat. So I've got you on the screen here, Greg. So thinking about the UK economy and what we've just been speaking about, what would be one wish that you'd like to see that we do for hydrogen?
Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with the grid reinforcements and connection reform. For me, there's significant competition with the likes of data centers that are seeing well publicized, and it is an issue that needs to be addressed and got on top of.
Yeah, thank you. David.
I'd like to hone in on another point that Greg made, actually, which was about the importance of risk-taking third parties and the opportunity for blending excess into the grid, into the gas grid, because I think that will stimulate projects that have an anchor requirement, an anchor off-taker, but then have other opportunities as well. And we won't develop those other opportunities around the anchor off-taker without that risk-taking third party being involved.
That's a really good point. Absolutely. And we have got this infrastructure, right? So we should be thinking about it and utilizing. Don't start reinventing the wheel again. I absolutely get that. Vicky. Thank you, David.
And mine's more on the commercial side. So my one wish would be that investors, private equity would take some more risks. I think they're all waiting for a very stable political landscape, which we know is not a reality. And we still need to make strides, and we still need to take chances. And I think there's a lot of unspent capital, particularly in energy transition, and that's really holding us back. And not all projects are going to be perfect, and we're not all going to get 15% returns, but we need to start taking some risks and putting some money into these earlier projects so that we can build on that and start to learn and build out the scale and build out those returns. So yeah, that would be my wish, is that a little bit more risk taking, a little bit less safe playing from the equity side of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did an investor workshop at Hydrogen Scotland, first one we've done actually. And one takeaway around investors, they look at the UK, they really like the policy side. However, again, it's building up that confidence, as you say, to come in and take those risks and get these projects going early stage.
And be creative. Like, it's a new
Absolutely.
industry, it's a new market. How can you creatively deploy capital to bring all the pieces together rather than doing it in such a traditional, way that energy projects are done? So I think it's about taking risks and being creative with that. How can you help an off-taker, feel comfortable to sign up to a 15-year deal? And how do you create these commercial structures so that everybody feels confident and
Brilliant.
and happy?
Thank you. Okay, so more risk, more appetite, and let's really go for it. Okay, so we need to come to the end now. I want to thank my panelists again, Greg, Vicky, David. Really appreciate that. And before we go, there's a hydrogen event going to be taking place on the 7th of May next year, Unlocking Hydrogen Growth in the UK 2026. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.